Welcome back to the Anthropology cult. Today, we are beginning Hegel's Philosophy of Mind by George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, translated from the Encyclopaedia of the Philosophical Sciences by William Wallace. Introduction. The knowledge of mind is the highest and hardest just because it is the most concrete of sciences. The significance of that absolute commandment, know thyself, whether we look at it in itself or under the historical circumstances of its first utterance, is not to promote mere self-knowledge in respect of the particular capacities, character, propensities, and foibles of the single self. The knowledge it commands means that of man's genuine reality, of what is essentially and ultimately true and real, of mind, as the true and essential being. Equally little is it the purport of mental philosophy to teach what is called knowledge of men, the knowledge whose aim is to detect the peculiarities, passions, and foibles of other men, and lay bare what are called the recesses of the human heart. Information of this kind is, for one thing, meaningless, unless on the assumption that we know the universal, man as man, and that always must be, as mind. And for another, being only engaged with casual, insignificant, and untrue aspects of mental life, it fails to reach the underlying essence of them all, the mind itself. Pneumatology, or, as it was also called, rational psychology, has been already alluded to in the introduction to the Logic as an abstract and generalizing metaphysic of the subject. Empirical or inductive psychology, on the other hand, deals with the concrete mind. And after the revival of the sciences, when observation and experience had been made the distinctive methods for the study of concrete reality, such psychology was worked on the same lines as other sciences. In this way, it came about that the metaphysical theory was kept outside the inductive science, and so prevented from getting any concrete embodiment or detail, whilst at the same time the inductive science clung to the conventional common-sense metaphysic, with its analysis into forces, various activities, etc., and rejected any attempt at a speculative treatment. The books of Aristotle on the soul, along with his discussions on its special aspects and states, are, for this reason, still by far the most admirable, perhaps even the sole work of philosophical value on this topic. The main aim of a philosophy of mind can only be to reintroduce unity of idea and principle into the theory of mind, and so reinterpret the lesson of those Aristotelian books. Even our own sense of the mind's living unity naturally protests against any attempt to break it up into different faculties, forces, or, what comes to the same thing, activities, conceived as independent of each other. But the craving for a comprehension of the unity is still further stimulated, as we soon come across distinctions between mental freedom and mental determinism, antitheses between free psychic agency and the corporeity that lies external to it, whilst we equally note the intimate interdependence of the one upon the other. In modern times, especially the phenomena of animal magnetism have given, even in experience, a lively and visible confirmation of the underlying unity of soul and of the power of its ideality. Before these facts, the rigid distinctions of practical common sense were struck with confusion, and the necessity of a speculative examination with a view to the removal of difficulties was more directly forced upon the student. The concrete nature of mind involves for the observer the peculiar difficulty that the several grades and special types which develop its intelligible unity in detail are not left standing as so many separate existences confronting its more advanced aspects. It is otherwise in external nature. There, matter and movement, for example, have a manifestation all their own. It is the solar system, and similarly, the differentia of sense perception have a sort of earlier existence in the properties of bodies, and still more independently in the four elements. The species and grades of mental evolution, on the contrary, lose their separate existence and become factors, states, and features in the higher grades of development. As a consequence of this, a lower and more abstract aspect of mind betrays the presence in it, even to experience, of a higher grade. Under the guise of sensation, for example, we may find the very highest mental life as its modification or its embodiment. And so sensation, which is but a mere form and vehicle, may to the superficial glance seem to be the proper seat, and, as it were, the source of those moral and religious principles with which it is charged. And the moral and religious principles thus modified may seem to call for treatment as species of sensation. But at the same time, when lower grades of mental life are under examination, it becomes necessary, if we desire to point to actual cases of them in experience, to direct attention to more advanced grades for which they are mere forms. In this way, subjects will be treated of by anticipation, which properly belong to later stages of development. For example, in dealing with natural awaking from sleep, we speak by anticipation of consciousness, or, in dealing with mental derangement, we must speak of intellect. What mind, or spirit, is. From our point of view, mind has for its presupposition nature, of which it is the truth, and, for that reason, its absolute prius. In this its truth, nature is vanished, and mind has resulted as the idea entered on possession of itself. Here the subject and object of the idea are 1. Either is the intelligent unity, the notion. This identity is absolute negativity, for whereas in nature the intelligent unity has its objectivity perfect but externalized, this self-externalization has been nullified and the unity, in that way, been made one and the same with itself. Thus, at the same time, it is this identity only so far as it is a return out of nature. For this reason, the essential, but formally essential feature of mind is liberty. That is, it is the notion's absolute negativity or self-identity. Considered as this formal aspect, it may withdraw itself from everything external and from its own externality, its very existence. It can thus submit to infinite pain, the negation of its individual immediacy. In other words, it can keep itself affirmative in this negativity and possess its own identity. All this is possible, so long as it is considered in its abstract, self-contained universality. This universality is also its determinate sphere of being. Having a being of its own, the universal is self-particularizing, whilst it still remains self-identical. Hence, the special mode of mental being is manifestation. The spirit is not some one mode or meaning which finds utterance or externality only in a form distinct from itself. It does not manifest or reveal something, but its very mode and meaning is this revelation. And thus, in its mere possibility, mind is at the same moment an infinite, absolute actuality. Revelation, taken to mean the revelation of the abstract idea, is an unmediated transition to nature, which comes to be. As mind is free, its manifestation is to set forth nature as its world. But because it is reflection, it, in thus setting forth its world, at the same time presupposes the world as a nature independently existing. In the intellectual sphere to reveal, is thus to create a world as its being, a being in which the mind procures the affirmation and truth of its freedom. The absolute is mind, spirit. This is the supreme definition of the absolute. To find this definition and to grasp its meaning and burthen was, we may say, the ultimate purpose of all education and all philosophy. It was the point to which turned the impulse of all religion and science, and it is this impulse that must explain the history of the world. The word mind, spirit, and some glimpse of its meaning was found at an early period, and the spirituality of God is the lesson of Christianity. It remains for philosophy in its own element of intelligible unity to get hold of what was thus given as a mental image, and what implicitly is the ultimate reality, and that problem is not genuinely and by rational methods solved, so long as liberty and intelligible unity is not the theme and the soul of philosophy. Subdivision. The development of mind, spirit, is in 3 stages. 1. In the form of self-relation. Within it, it has the ideal totality of the idea, that is, it has before it all that its notion contains. Its being is to be self-contained and free. This is mind subjective. 2. In the form of reality, realized, that is in a world produced and to be produced by it. In this world, freedom presents itself under the shape of necessity. This is mind objective. 3. In that unity of mind as objectivity and of mind as ideality and concept, which essentially and actually is, and forever produces itself, mind in its absolute truth. This is mind absolute. The 2 first parts of the doctrine of mind embrace the finite mind. Mind is the infinite idea. Thus, finitude here means the disproportion between the concept and the reality, but with the qualification that it is a shadow cast by the mind's own light, a show or illusion which the mind implicitly imposes as a barrier to itself in order, by its removal, actually to realize and become conscious of freedom as its very being, that is, to be fully manifested. The several steps of this activity, on each of which, with their semblance of being, it is the function of the finite mind to linger, and through which it has to pass, are steps in its liberation. In the full truth of that liberation is given the identification of the 3 stages: finding a world presupposed before us, generating a world as our own creation, and gaining freedom from it and in it. To the infinite form of this truth, the show purifies itself till it becomes a consciousness of it. A rigid application of the category of finitude by the abstract logician is chiefly seen in dealing with mind and reason. It is held not a mere matter of strict logic, but treated also as a moral and religious concern. To adhere to the point of view of finitude, and the wish to go further, is reckoned a mark of audacity, if not of insanity, of thought. Whereas, in fact, such a modesty of thought as treats the finite as something altogether fixed and absolute is the worst of virtues. And to stick to a post which has no sound ground in itself is the most unsound sort of theory. The category of finitude was, at a much earlier period, elucidated and explained at its place in the logic. An elucidation which, as in logic for the more specific though still simple thought forms of finitude, so in the rest of philosophy for the concrete forms, has merely to show that the finite is not, that is not the truth, but merely a transition and an emergence to something higher. This finitude of the spheres so far examined is the dialectic that makes a thing have its cessation by another and in another, but spirit the intelligent unity and the implicit eternal, is itself just the consummation of that internal act by which nullity is nullified and vanity is made vain. And so, the modesty alluded to is a retention of this vanity, the finite, in opposition to the true. It is itself, therefore, vanity. In the course of the mind's development, we shall see this vanity appear as wickedness at that turning point at which mind has reached its extreme immersion in its subjectivity and its most central contradiction. Join us next time for Section 1, Mind Subjective.